Hello, beautiful people. Welcome back to Fireside Air Chats. This time I'm going to be talking to Brittany, Sister Brittany Purr. So the room is going to start off with just me and Brittany as speakers, but I'm not going to keep it that way for long. I'll open it up so that more and more people can jump in, comment, ask questions as well as I continue to explore the mind, the beauty, the grace, and the wisdom of Brittany Purr. I am looking forward to exploring this amazing human being. Sister Brittany, thank you so much for agreeing. I decided to ask you, and I'm so grateful that you agreed. I decided to ask you because I was truly curious about what makes you tick, how you became the person that you've become. I've listened to the different stories you've told about yourself and how you engage with different people in the different rooms, and I'm truly, truly curious to get to know who you are, the stories that made you. Like, just tell me about yourself, where you started, where you come from, where you grew up. Just give as much detail as you feel is necessary for me to just get to know and get a perspective of who you are. I must say that this is starting off a bit nervous because you are so professional, so smooth in how you speak. But I have no doubt about your heart because you show up with such openness and generosity. So that's what gives me comfort. Like, Sipiwie, it's going to be okay. And the few times when I've seen you like letting loose have been freaking awesome. So I'm hoping that today I'm going to get a much more laid back and relaxed Brittany. But yeah, go ahead, man. Please tell me about yourself. Who's Brittany?
Sipiwie, thank you so much for doing these Fireside Air Chats, and thank you so much for asking me to join you in this as the second person. I am super honored to be asked and also be interviewed by you because you are an incredible, incredible man as well. So starting off with gratitude. For me, it's always challenging to know what to share and where to really begin, but I will try to fulfill this chronologically. So I was born and raised in California, and I've lived here my entire life. Not too proud of that. I was raised by a single mom, but also lived in a multi-generational household. So my grandmother, it was pretty much her house that I lived in for the first 19 years of my life. And I had aunts and uncles in and out through that period of time. My dad was only in the picture briefly. We only had a few visits with him. Then around the age 6 or 7, he pretty much disappeared. So my childhood is very interesting because my mother has narcissistic tendencies, and I was definitely not the favored child. My grandmother was tapped out watching TV all day, 16 hours a day. And it was either that or she was working at Kmart prior to when she retired. Occasionally when I was younger, her favorite hobby was going to the bowling alley, so she would take me there. People still smoked in the bowling alley at that time. And I do have a brother, but we do not get along. It's an unfortunate thing when a parent has narcissistic tendencies that if there's more than one child present, that parent typically kind of pits them against each other, doesn't know how to encourage ways for their kids to get along and to work together. Also nearby, I had my great-grandparents, so occasionally I would go spend time with them. And spending time with them was like heaven. It was a complete contrast to what I was experiencing at home, which was largely ignored. So definitely abandonment. Dealing with that sort of situation was part of that. But having that alone time is a blessing. However, the other blessing was spending time with my great-grandparents who really patterned what healthy relationships look like. So my great-grandparents managed an apartment complex even when I was younger, and they were married for 72 years. They were Czechoslovakian immigrants from World War I. So the fights with my brother and he and I not getting along, it actually brought my great-grandfather to tears, and that kind of was a wake-up moment for me, like, this isn't normal type of thing. And so that was one of the moments where awareness crept in that stuff that I was experiencing was not the norm. I also had friends that I would go spend time with, and I would just observe the different behaviors of parents. So it gave me more of a well-rounded view of life being different. So I didn't end up patterning myself after what I was experiencing at home from my mom or my grandmother. I recognized their behavior patterns as what not to do. So another interesting abnormal thing within my childhood is that household that I grew up in and lived in for 19 years of my life was haunted. And I have a great interview on my blog, Obscuram, that kind of goes into sharing the experience that I had, comparing it with the experience that one of my aunts had and that my mother experienced as well. Coming back to having lots of alone time, I think that was another blessing in disguise. I would spend time outside. I would spend time with pets. We had a whole bunch of different pets, cats, dogs. We had a rabbit at one point in time. My mom had cockatiels, fish. I ended up getting Birds as well. There were finches, society finches and zebra finches. The society finches even had babies at one point. But that alone time helped me to really form aspects of myself that I don't think I would have otherwise. I really engaged with nature on a very different level. And this is where my ideation on the esoterics, where my knowledge from that comes from. And I also do somewhat consider myself an empath. I just don't like donning that label because there's too much other things associated with it. And I try to really bring a scientific and analytical mindset to what it is that I do and experience. And that scientific and analytical mindset initially came from, yes, that space of being alone and having to figure things and a lot of things out on my own, especially my own survival in some ways. But just experiencing living in a haunted house and coming to terms or coping with the weird, uncomfortable situations of, things like suddenly seeing a 9-year-old Victorian girl in the backyard when I was 6. But another interesting factor of being in a house that obviously had some sort of different, I'm going to call it a tuning of energy, because I kind of have a theory that apparitions, ghosts, that sort of thing is more of like a way of nature recording something. So that can be an atmospheric response, like, if there's iron oxide within a house, lead paint, those sorts of things could interact within certain temperatures, certain ways. If it's a high magnetism area, can potentially cause an apparition to appear. So that's kind of my theory on that. But also, I would get things like prophetic dreams, harkening back to the birds that I had. When they laid eggs, I had a very specific series of 2 dreams, one night after another. And those dreams not only told me what would happen with the first batch of eggs, it told me the days that they would lay the eggs and then how many chicks would hatch from that. And on with that, meditation was a very natural thing that I just happened to come upon. I didn't even know it was meditation back then. I didn't even know what meditation really was. And so, yeah, I had weird experiences like that where things just naturally came to me, or I had to figure things out. And that just built upon my knowledge and wisdom and love of learning in general. So had I not that love of learning instilled in me kind of by force, I mean, not really, because kids naturally are little scientists and enjoy learning. But because of that and being in the public school system, I still really harkened back to my own ingrained instincts on learning that I got to hone and develop. And I was kind of bored at school. Elementary school was fine. And then the big shift into middle school, everything kind of changed. And middle school was challenging because the knowledge that I could rely on was that I was being judged based on my brother who had gone through these school systems before me. And that was my idea of it. And it could have been other things. I grew up in Orange County, and there are very few African-American individuals out there. But I was placed in classes that were not at my level. I was never encouraged in school, obviously not encouraged at home. And so I just kind of came to the conclusion of, screw this stuff. I am bored off my ass. And I just drew all day. I just doodled, and then eventually got into theater arts. And that theater arts was like a godsend for me in multiple different ways, on teaching me how to emotionally regulate and balance myself, onto how to actually have emotions. I was literally raised to be a sociopath, to not have any emotions of my own. I was abused for coming to my mom crying, seeking some sort of nurturing, and that would be met with terror, and that she would give me something real to cry about. So the counterbalance was definitely learning healthy emotional regulation, what was okay, experiencing these emotions, actually making the connection within my psyche of like, oh, this is what it's like to be happy. Like, I remember that experience. But for the most part, general schooling, I know that I could do the schoolwork last minute, get a B average, and pretty much coasted through most of middle school and high school in that way. Now, the other interesting thing was, even though I didn't deal with anything horrific in school, I was just severely bored out of my mind. I pretty much blocked out a lot of that information within middle school and high school, except for moments that I really enjoyed. Like, I don't remember any of the teachers' names. A lot of people are like, oh yeah, do you remember this? I'm like, no, I don't. I don't remember it. I was bored. And so I relate it to being so bored that it was traumatic. So I'm just going to skip past most of the stuff in high school. I mean, high school, I was still in theater arts. That was my bread and butter, and that's what got me into the entertainment industry. The high school that I went to, a lot of major industry people surprisingly go through, even though it's not in Los Angeles. But that teacher had huge connections. She still is alive today, still connected with her and the class, because you had to actually audition for it's called Drama 5 class at that time. But in my junior year of high school, friends and I went to go celebrate a birthday party, and we went to the beach, and they had fire pits at the beach and everything. So we get a fire pit, and then suddenly this group of guys like walks up to us. They're like, "Hey, can we share the pit?" And we're like, "Yeah, why not? You're cool. They're cool." Like, we struck up some great conversations, and they were just great people. And we're like, we got to stay connected. They're a few years older than us, but whatever. They're very cool people. And yeah, just interesting where that goes. So that group was basically a group of hackers, like old school hackers, very creative, and was like a mosh podge of different groups. So there's people who were Ren Fair, there's a Shania group, and this group just kind of came together under this main moniker that I am not going to share here, but mainly hackers and gamers. So coming back to my grandparents, in 2000, which was the year I graduated high school, I lost my great-grandfather and my grandma, whose household that I was living in. And my great-grandparents were married for 72 years. That is and was super inspiring to me. And I had always wanted to, if I were to get married, that I wanted to aspire to a healthy relationship like what they had, because they set the actual pattern for healthy relationship interactions with me. And in 2001 was when my great-grandmother passed away, and I was going to LACC for cinema at the time. So going to LACC not only got me into the ideas of the legal system, because it was part of the cinema course, and also I did things like film splicing. Being in LA, got more into the entertainment industry, started doing some background work, more acting gigs, got in there, and yeah, I was still hanging out with the hacker commune for the most part, partially, quote unquote, living with my mom, but I was really hanging out with the hackers at their place. And also at that time, hanging out at goth clubs. There were several in Los Angeles at that point, and that will kind of come into play a little later within this discussion. So one thing about that is, as a kid, I was super Christian, like mean, not nice Christian, very self-righteous, just a horrible person. The thing that shifted that was witnessing the church that I went to, which actually was a daycare also when I was younger. But that church that I went to, the congregation took it upon themselves to send threat letters to a new pastor that was coming in. And that kind of was just like, wait a second, this is so wrong. This is not okay. And then, as I mentioned prior, being raised to be like very sociopathic, that was kind of like one of the big shifts of noticing my behaviors and the pain that I had caused people. And it kind of woke me up as well, in addition to diving into theater arts. So one of my memories is I remember one girl, and I think it was at camp or something, she was goth, and she asked me like if she was going to heaven. And I was like, I don't know. And then lo and behold, I kind of fell in love with goth culture myself. And I'm like, shit. Okay. And it's pertinent to cover camp. One of the great things was camping. That's what my mom would take the family out to do each year as a vacation. And so we got to go to Sequoia, Kings Canyon, Three Rivers, Yosemite, various areas of just enjoying nature. And that was some of my greatest memories. I also had a grandfather who lived in San Francisco. So I remember being about 7, heading up to San Francisco, going to the Fisherman's Wharf. I don't quite remember where exactly my grandfather lived in the area, but I remember it was at one of the ends of the BART train, and we took the BART train into town. And my grandfather lived was gorgeous, just like rolling green hills. And yeah, I'm trying to figure it out, but I can't ask my mom for that and can't rely on her for that. My grandfather passed away in passed away several years ago. So covering my grandfather briefly, my mother's paternal side is Italian, and the Italian culture greatly influenced a lot of how we did things in my childhood. Even though my grandmother is Czechoslovakian, they divorced because my grandfather did the Italian thing. And it's very well known that Italian guys kind of sleep around. I even had a teacher in high school who was an Italian teacher, spoke the Southern dialect, which is where my family's from. And very, very passionate woman, very passionate, and was like warning us against Italian men. She's like, ladies, do not do Italian men. They will sleep around on you. And it's like, okay, all right, so I guess it's a thing. And just a few years ago, found out that I have a couple of other half aunts and uncles. And there was rifts in my family. Now, this is kind of like the family curse is divorce. And that started with my grandma, who I lived with, and my grandfather, and my family, my mom and aunts and uncles had blamed my great grandparents for that divorce. And because apparently my grandmother and grandfather still very much loved each other, but my grandfather cheated on my grandmother, and I guess my great grandparents stepped in and were like, get rid of the dude. And my grandmother like was just steeped in misery. She was just a miserable human being, unhappy, and yeah, 16 hours a day on TV. Yep. So I think I'm gonna put a pin in it here and let you ask some questions. There's a lot to cover there. I hopefully went about it in a well-rounded way. I didn't go into first jobs and other things like that. I don't know if you want to go into that, but we have been talking for about 30 minutes now, so I'm gonna take a little break here. Feel free to.
There's so many directions that I could explore with your story so far, but I think it would be better if I let you continue with your story, just with the brief highlights of each section of your life leading up to where you are. Because I would like to ask the questions in a way that is tied into who you've become, so that the story is much more thematic. I'm not sure if that's making sense.
Got it. All right. So I'm not going to go into the various jobs I've had because I've had a bunch of different jobs. But coming back to college, I only spent 1 year in college and I failed. And I failed so badly that I went into a very deep depression. So what happened is I was in my cinema classes, and here's where the things that I was raised with or brought up to believe kind of began to form in adverse ways of being. So in my cinema class, I had to do a project where I am with a group. And so kind of just one of those moments where you have to pick people or let people pick you and watch people form into groups, and turn to the guys next to me and was like, okay, well, do you want to group together? And they're like, yeah, sure, sure. And within the first class, they ended up dropping and not letting me know at all. And I was on financial aid at the time, so was like, okay, well, shoot, I can't do this project now. So, all right, can't finish the class. Dang it. And with the scholarship, it's like you have to do well in your classes. If you bomb it twice, your scholarship's done. You're screwed. You're on your own. So me being naive and a dumbass at that time, unfortunately, did the class again. Same people were in it, and was like, okay, you guys need to tell me if you're dropping this class so I can find another group or figure out something else. And they're like, yeah, sure, whatever. And they did it again. So that, and I was also in philosophy and got a D in that, which I even asked the teacher what was that about, and he gave me some bullshit response. So needless to say, I'm not very fond of the school system. So I went into a very deep depression where I pretty much just wanted to waste away and die. I didn't eat, was just pretty much in bed all day, and my mom, being who she is, was just like, yeah, I'm just going to send you off. Go on a trip with visiting your family, which actually was a great thing, getting away from her. So I got to visit my aunt in Utah, and my grandfather had moved to New Mexico, so I got to do like this little bus route between Utah and New Mexico, which gave me a lot of time to reflect. I got to connect with my grandfather and get more of the family cookbook, which is amazing. I think I have the most complete copy of that, and got to spend time outside of California, which was great. So when I came back from that, I ended up moving in with a smaller faction of the hacker commune into an apartment where I was living in the living room, paying like $300 for rent. I was barely making any money. I mean, any normal gig that pays minimum wage does not pay a living wage. And so, yeah, I haven't been the person of, at that time, never really had great fortune in my life. And then when the lease was up, everyone ended up going in different directions. I was back in with my mom for a little bit, which is utter hell. Tried moving out again with another coworker, but they had some weird stuff going on, and then moved back in with my mom. And to escape my mom in 2004 was when I got married. And that relationship had its extreme ups and downs. I went straight into the company of another person with narcissistic tendencies, and those were definitely more extreme, but I was still at the time bent on being a good Christian woman and wanted to really aspire to having a long relationship. So that was not a healthy time in my life. I mean, there were a lot of great things. definitely made huge strides within the entertainment industry, and of course with the help of that individual. And then that's when I worked in video games, got into, some other fun groups. Yeah. I then, several halfway in the relationship, had my daughter, and she was a home water birth. That also changed my ideas on health for the better, which I had already done. I skipped over this within high school. At my freshman year of high school, I weighed 260 pounds, and I had gotten down to 130 by the end of high school, and that was on my own. Okay, so coming back, I was married for 10 years in a not so happy marriage, but I took everything in stride and did the best I could to be the best that I could in that situation. And then in 2014 was the beginning of divorce, and this was literally on Halloween in 2014, where we had discussed separation and all that stuff. And I am not going to go into too many details on that. It is overall, it was a very traumatic experience of what happened. There's a lot of sensitive information around that, and I will, at some point, get my act together and do a deep dive and publish a book around that experience and help others to navigate that. But needless to say, that kind of going through that experience, helping others through their experiences, is kind of what got me more into coaching. And at that time with separation, I was a stay-at-home mom for my daughter until what was supposed to be a separation, which wasn't, because you can't trust narcissistic tendencies or those who have them, to be honest. So at that point, I had started a job of doing Postmates, and it was probably one of the best decisions ever. It really, I got to meet some very wonderful, interesting people that just kind of gave probably not directly, but subtly gave guidance to my life. For the better. But in 2016, one of my friends approached me and was like, "Hey, you're goth, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And this was one of the friends that I had met being a parent, and there's parenting groups and everything that you can, help socialize your kids and socialize yourself with. So she was like, "Hey, there's this like secret goth club in Los Angeles. Can you help me get into that?" So I started doing research, looking at mutual connections and everything, and kind of failed to get us in, but then she found another route and she was like, "You're coming with me." So that was an interesting experience, ended up being a regular and became a member, and then became one of their first hires on the business side. So that was basically how I got into the music industry, being the assistant to major music industry people that were running that club. And I also did some business development for them, change management, product design, some of the legal documentation, like all sorts of different things. I was basically the generalist. And I'd also done some other stuff with Expert Dojo prior to that, and was also tapped by a friend to join a nonprofit. So I had a lot going on during that time, in the window and wake of the divorce. But it was still a lot of ups and downs, a lot of fun. So ultimately, divorce was another one of those great things that were traumatic at the time. It was a very traumatic experience. I still have to deal with the ex, but overall, no matter how tough things have been, because I was homeless at the beginning of 2021 for a month, no matter how challenging and how tough things have been, I've been a lot happier, and ultimately I can say better for it. It gave me a lot of wake-up calls, explorations in who I am as an unlimited being who is just insatiably curious and loves to explore and experiment and create. So, yeah, I worked for that goth club for about 2 years, then left because I was dealing with PTSD, and the PTSD was from the divorce. But I went off to do kind of my own thing after that, and in 2017, I was in a major accident. That was while I was working at the club, and I was on my way home. That also was a huge wake-up call. Interesting, being able to connect with my body more through that. So yeah, I'm kind of like, I need some stuff to go on. It's so I guess that's where I'm gonna end this part, because I'm kind of like getting all over the place. I have a hard time just kind of like free talking for the most part, and that's just from like my childhood of not having my personhood around my mother and my family. So being able to talk for long periods of time or even doing any sort of public speaking is very challenging. It's very different from having a script and acting. So yeah, I kind of bounced around a lot there. Half.
I think your life is so rich. There's so many layers that I'd like to explore. But before I go into the deep stuff, I'd like to really hear a little bit, a few stories about that haunted house. That must be something. Because I remember when I was a kid, because we also grew up tough and things were not so great. And some evenings had like this feeling of like, I'm really afraid of the night. Did you also get that same feeling? But I think how much more compounded is that feeling when your mother is also not so affectionate, not so protective, and she's so harsh. I wonder what that would have done to how you felt most of the time when you were a kid. But before you go into that, it would be so nice if you just start with a few stories about the haunted house.
So I'm going to post a link to my blog in case anybody wants to check out a more well-rounded story of what I and my family experienced within that household. So if you look at the picture in the previous post, my room was to the right of the front door, and the kitchen is to the left. So every night after my grandmother would go to bed, this was around like 2 a.m., I would be woken up by sounds coming from the kitchen. And it literally sounded like someone taking two plungers and just like walking around the kitchen with those plungers attached to their feet. Now, I had theorized, I was like, well, maybe it's the refrigerator, but I never heard it making that sound during the day. And so I was like, okay, maybe it's just someone messing with me. I actually initially always thought it was just the refrigerator. I just chalked it up to that. So I know you can't see it in the picture that I posted, but if you go further to the right on the house, then you'll see my brother's room, which is the front rightmost part of the house. In between so at that end of the house is, if you go back into the house, like towards the backyard, you'll hit the bathroom to the far right, and then my mother's room is on the other side of the restroom. So my grandmother's room, of course, was the master bedroom, and that was pretty much across the hallway from my room, basically. It was across the hallway and a little more to the right. So every time that I wanted to get to the bathroom, I had to pass by her bedroom and my mom's bedroom to get to the restroom. So one night I'm going down the hallway and I just happened to look into my grandmother's room and the curtains were open. And it's nighttime and I peer outside of the window and there is a Victorian girl in, Victorian girl dress, like very not super upscale, but very simple. And her hair is done up in braids and she's standing next to the peach tree back there. Now, the crazy thing is there's no lights in the backyard. There's no floodlight. So for me to see her super clearly, she was kind of self-luminant. And that terrified me. You don't expect to see a little girl that's several years older than you just staring at you from the backyard. Who puts their kid up to that? And it freaked me out. It is so unexpected and so terrifying. Like, where did this person suddenly come from? What the heck is going on here? And so I would, anytime those curtains were open, I would just run by that room. I would just run by that room in general to get to the bathroom. I did not want to deal with it. So that's one of my earliest and most striking memories of the house being haunted. Now, there was a whole host of other things that happened. And with that, my brother and I had these shower crayons. And one day, my mom starts yelling. She's like, "Who did this?" And I'm like, what the heck is going on? Go into the bathroom at the end of the hallway, and there's these little doodles on the full-size mirror, which is mounted on the inside door of the bathroom. So at the top, there's 3 cats, and they're stick figure cats, a line, and then several other weird doodles, like people or something else. I don't remember those other doodles. But it was my brother who did the offense to the full-size bathroom mirror, and he swore up and down that he did not draw the cats. And at this moment, I was very frustrated. I was insulted because he's insinuating that I drew the cats. And I was like, I don't draw that shitty. Remember, I spent most of my days during school just doodling. I'm a good artist. You can check out another room. I'll post it in the comments, which is a gallery space of my artwork and my doodles. And I do not draw stick figure cats. I was seriously offended by it. So offended that it's like, well, who drew the cats? Because nobody else was home. So along with this, there was another phenomenon where I would hear my voice from years past just suddenly say a phrase, and that would be it. Initially, I'd been home alone and thought it was just okay, maybe my memory is doing this weird thing and just kind of remembering these things because I could kind of remember the age that I had said that exact phrase. But there was this one time, and this was middle school, high school, where my mom was actually home and, heard my voice as a kid. And she yells down the hallway. She's like, "Did you say something?" And I'm like, "No, but you heard that too, right?" And she's like, "Yeah." Okay. And that was the end of the conversation because we really didn't talk about it. Like, my family doesn't really talk about much. So now we're going to come full circle to I'm 19 years old. This is right before we moved from this place. And my brother had gotten into trouble where, like, his friends would play pranks or egg the house or whatnot. But this was during broad daylight. All of a sudden, I hear this, like, tap tap on my window, and I look quickly, and I see, like, this burly, muddy looking hand just dip out of view. And I'm sitting there going, this is the stupidest, most contrived BS that I've ever dealt with. And it must be my brother just doing my brother's friends doing their prank thing. And I'm just like not having it. So I'm like, I'm going to catch this mother effer. And I storm outside and I look around, there's nothing. So I'm like, okay, there's got to be footprints in the grass. At that point, when I was growing up, our grass was lush. We had lots of plants in front. There was trees in front. There was rose bushes, much more beautiful than what it has become today. So I'm checking the grass for any sort of depression because the person that tapped on my window is a pretty big sized guy to have a hand and forearm that big. So I'm looking in the grass and I don't see any depressions in the grass. So I'm like, okay, maybe it's just the plants tapping on the window. We had some bushes. If they weren't trimmed back in the wind, they would kind of like, tap against the glass. No, they were trimmed back. So at this point, I'm like, okay, that's weird. And then it dawns on me. All right, I'm hearing these suction footprints marching around the kitchen at night. Muddy hand. Muddy man. Oh, it made sense. So that sound going through the kitchen at night is pretty equitable to the sound of someone wearing boots and stomping around in thick mud. So that stuff was pretty scary. The thing that wasn't scary was the ghost cat at night I would feel a cat jump up on the bed. I had a cat who I pretty much stole from my brother. Her name was Chaz. So she just took to me, scrambled tortoiseshell. They're weird cats. And, I thought it was her jumping on the bed. And I would just kind of like sit up to go pet her and there would be nothing there. And then I would feel the cat purring and there's nothing there. And I'm just like, okay, this is fine. For some reason, that was not as scary as seeing, a Victorian girl in the backyard or, stomping through the kitchen at night. And then there was a little kind of like an aura sort of energetic figure that was upstairs. Upstairs felt really not okay within the household. The household always felt kind of, like there was a heaviness within the household, specifically my grandmother's room. There was like, it's like looking at a picture with a vignette around it, how it kind of like has that darkness creeping in. That was what my grandmother's room somehow had, even though it was on a very lighter side of the house. Like my mom's bedroom would be bright and vibrant, and my grandmother's room just had this dark cloud to it. But yeah, the upstairs figure was really creepy, and we barely went upstairs. And talking to my aunt recently, she told me that when I was really little, I would talk about like these little black, dark critters that were wandering around the house. Now, I don't remember any of those stories. I just remember like hanging around outside, meditating, those sorts of things. So I was definitely the one who was able to see more of this stuff than anybody else. So I'm going to wrap this up with like most recent things that I've experienced. In the apartment in Hollywood, I caught an orb, which is not something I really ever believed in because a lot of times people are like, oh, that insect is an orb. No, it's dust or it's an insect. But what I caught on my security camera was something that I can't explain. I've run it by people who are absolute geniuses. They cannot explain it. I've run it by the director of Saw 2 and subsequent ones, and he's very skeptical. He could not explain it. And yeah, so there's that. That place was definitely haunted. There are so many stories with that place. And that I'm just going to clue you into that we might want to explore that a little bit. Hollywood is wild. What else? I can usually sense when there are really heavy, draining energies. So there's some places I walk into and I'm just like, I start feeling very fatigued, very energetically drained. And I can just tell that there's something wrong with that place. As a matter of fact, at one point when I was still married, we were looking for a house to move into. And one of the places that we went into was just like, I just felt this feeling of just an energetic presence being like, get the F out of here. And I'm like, what the heck is going on? And the owner of the house mentioned, oh yeah, there's a basement. I'm like, show me the basement. And she's like, well, like deliberated. There wasn't anything down there, but she was just like, no. And then I was like, show me the basement. We opened the door and I just feel like a rush of that, get the F out of here energy. And I was just like, I need to definitely get out of here. That is not happy. So, yeah, that's just a little bit of hauntings stuff. Team Long Chit.
Wow. I'm definitely glad that I didn't listen to this at night before going to sleep. This would have definitely affected the quality of my sleep. But I'm so grateful that you shared this story, all the different stories here. I tend to be very skeptical when it comes to stories talking about hauntings and ghosts and like scary stories. I'm very skeptical of. However, there's too many people talking about the existence of such phenomena for me to just say, it can probably be explained somehow. And I think it is possible to get an explanation for it, but for some reason, it eludes all of us. But also, if there is the negative side of haunting, which is like scary, then it makes me believe that there's a positive side, which is like, unexplained beautiful things happening, like the display of beauty. You just walk in and you just see beautiful things. And that's how I believe that nature is built. That if there's an existence of a negative thing, there must be an existence of a positive thing. So while I'm skeptical, I'm very careful to not be dismissive of people's life experiences. Because even my mother told of a story when she grew up where she experienced similar things that just cannot be explained. And she doesn't like talking about it because for her it reminds of a very traumatic experience and a traumatic time in her life. But she's told us these stories and they're fascinating to explore. And again, it makes me aware that there's things that are beyond our comprehension. Like we just cannot comprehend them existing in a scientific way, but people experience it all the time. So thank you for sharing that. Like I enjoyed listening to those stories, even though they were a bit freaky, especially, that Victorian girl. That was freaky.
So just want to touch on a few points before I get to the questions. With the reason why it eludes us is because something that I've noticed in the scientific community, they're automatically dismissive of it instead of exploring it. And the most fascinating things is hearing Christians say, I don't believe in ghosts. And then I sit there and go, Holy Ghost? Spirit? And it just always makes me laugh because I'm like, ghosts are even mentioned in the Bible, I believe 3 times. So this is a very valid, real phenomenon that has been going on as long as humans have been here. And another point on that with the beautiful things, I have another story. So my daughter was 3, close to 4, and she had kind of adopted an Italian accent with her speech. So she would say things like, I don't like this. And I'm like, oh, kid, those Italian genes are really showing through. But then we were walking through the hallway and she points at a family photo and it's her dad's side of the family, but she points at someone. She's like, that's not so-and-so, that's Eugenia. And I'm like, well, what did you say? And she's like, that's Eugenia. And I'm like, so just like a little taken back. So the funny thing is, my great grandmother on my mom's paternal side, the one from Italy, so crazy, lots of stories about her, but she is like a matriarch of the family, even beyond the grave. I always felt her presence around me when I was a kid. That trip to San Francisco was her memorial service, so I got meet a lot of the family on that side, and we call her Grandma Leone. That's what we call it. It's actually Leone, but we call her Grandma Leone. We never use her actual name. And her actual name is Eugenia. So a 3, almost 4-year-old trying to pronounce that, it would come out as Eulina. And so that is the fun side of the story. And there is a story from the 80s, something miracle. I have to look it up and link it later. But where it was a school bombing and the bomb went off in the school with all of the kids, all the faculty around in this room. The kids and the faculty were somehow protected from the blast. And later on, inspections of hearing the kids' stories and people's stories, the kids were like, yeah, we were protected by angels. And they were like, well, that's interesting, because they kind of all had this supernatural experience. And then one of the kids somehow a year or 2 later points to a picture and like, that's my angel. And it happened to be their ancestor. So it's just kind of beautiful how guardian angels could actually be ancestors. There could be something to this. So that's the beautiful side of the story. My stories.
I would like to explore another aspect, which is what you mentioned about your mother being narcissistic and not so affectionate and caring as you needed her to be. Because I grew up in a similar situation. I knew that our mother loved us. She cared for us. I could see when we were suffering that she wanted to alleviate our suffering, but she was not affectionate and she had a temper and she would beat us up like really with rage when she was angry. And I didn't like this when I was a child. I hated it. And it affected me in ways that I'm still having to deal with today. But I got to a point in my life where I started asking questions about Why did she turn out that way? My conclusion was I realized that she also grew up in a very tough environment. She didn't know what love was. And she didn't know how to give that love because she never knew what it felt like inside. And this led me to forgive her and have so much grace for her because I could, for the first time, understand, man, if you experienced all of these things that you're telling me and, grew up the way that you did, I can completely understand why you would not know how to be loving to other people or even your children because you never experienced that as a child. So my question then to you is, what do you think made your mother into that? Has that helped you in reconciling who she became? That would be an interesting thing to hear. Why you believe she was the way she was.
Well, definitely abuse was part of it. My grandmother, the miserable one who was sitting in front of the TV 16 hours a day, I had two photos of her. One was her in front of the bluffs in Santa Monica, and she's just raw dead gorgeous, lived in Culver City, which at that point in time was a studio town. So basically, I kind of equate her TV watching and me participating partially in that. We would watch like old Hollywood movies from her heyday. And I definitely got a film history background through that. And definitely later on in life, kind of got the feeling of, seems like she either wanted to or was working in the industry. And then having kids and the divorce just ripped her life away from her because the other photo that I had is a photo of her just letting herself go. Like her hair is all disheveled, gray. She just like completely different person from that person on the beach. So my family doesn't really talk about things. So my grandmother never shared anything about, what she wanted to do besides, working or retiring from Kmart. And my mom does not share anything. She keeps her pain wrapped up tight and no accommodation and no space for anything else. So for me, I was the problem one because I tried needing her. And so there really was not the capacity for someone who is different from her. So my mother and brother are like extreme athletes. My mom did marathon running. I theorize it's to run away from things physically, as she does mentally. And my brother, as an athlete, did football. He pushed the limits by doing distance marathons and triathlons and all that good stuff. And then my mom started doing triathlons following him. And so they're like two peas in a pod. My brother's definitely patterned himself after her, and she, follows him a little bit on things. And he's ultimately the golden child. And, he was the first child as well. So I come along and I'm like, I'll do circus arts, but screw running. I'm not doing running. No, thank you. I would prefer to do contortion, which, I am naturally extremely flexible. And then I'm the artist and creative. I'm meticulous. I have that that side of my family, which the Italian side of my family actually did marble quarrying and sculpting. So I kind of picked up more of the artistic side. And my father, I have no idea what his proclivities or talents were. Just none of my family ever talked or shared about things at all. So there's a huge distance issue within my family and those relationships in general. So I just I don't get along with my mother and my brother. And so I just don't spend much time with them. I mean, we don't even call regularly or anything like that, but my mother and brother do. So yeah, I've done a lot of deep dives into narcissistic tendencies, lots of observation. But I never really got the feeling that I was very loved. I mean, yeah, I survived childhood. I was on my own a lot. But I also never got the feeling that I was wanted. Like I've asked my mom, like, did you just want to abort me? Like, what the hell? But as long as I am not living with my mom, we've come to a space where at one point with the divorce, because my mom took sides with the ex, regardless of what happened within the situation. I have some theories on this with the fawning type of response to fear, which most people aren't even aware of. Most people are aware of fight or flight, but there's also freeze and fawn. And so with that fawning mechanism, she associates closer with people who are more abusive in a way. So she still chose that sort of individual over me, her own daughter. And she still does to this day. Like, she knows what went down in the divorce, how hard it was on me. And she's like, last time I was out there, she's like sitting there, texting the ex, sending him photos and all that stuff, which, I had to rise above that breach of my desire for privacy. But overall, finding peace, finding forgiveness, that took me cutting off all contact with her for a couple of months. And this is like her pattern thing and the way to actually deal with her, because my aunt, who, I'm more like, she's also creative, very crafty, more of a coach. We're more alike than anybody else in the family at this point. And yeah, we both take kind of like, I only had to do it once, but she's had to do it multiple times. And then she'll kind of like coach my mom through how to understand empathy, because my mom had a lot handed to her. She like lived in a big house that her mother paid for, that her mother took care of. And then she'll criticize me because I'm doing life, single parenting completely on my own. But still, I mean, there was the ability to reach a level of peace. And that, for me personally, actually took Ho'oponopono, which is, it's like a prayer or a mantra that I mentioned before, which basically goes, and I might be messing up the order, but it's, I'm sorry, please forgive me, I love you, thank you. So strange that I would, have to forgive myself or forgive her in that paradigm, but that's what it takes to really overcome and work through these things, because it's not necessarily an external shift, it's the internal shift of your way of being. So was I an asshole? Of course. I like tried to get out of that household as much as possible. With my feelings about it, it's like that kind of leaves a space for an impasse on coming to any sort of recognition. So overall, me working through my deficiencies has helped me to see her and to see the situation better and navigate it better. And just one word on that. A lot of times people who are in those situations tend to be empaths, highly sensitive people. Like, I can pick up a lot of different things that most people don't in a variety of different ways. And so, even the trauma lends itself to gratitude, but the adverse side of that is not seeing the person for who they actually are or who they've told you they are. So I always really wanted my mom to be that nurturing person. Would get frustrated because she never was that, never presented as that, because I was trying to typecast her in this role and encourage that role. And it's like, no, I get to see this person who she is, and I cannot trust her. And that's okay. She gets to be who she is, and I get to be who I am, and I get to be wiser and better for it.
That was so deep, Brittany. And I'm interested in hearing how you have managed to steer your life away from that. Because it's something that draws you in about growing up in those situations. And even though you vow with yourself that you would not be like that, for some reason you end up finding yourself in those situations. At least that's what I found in my own life. That the abuse that I experienced, I almost transferred it to the next generation until I deliberately, first of all, forgave my mom for what she did. But secondly, I apologized. And my kids were still small, but I went to them and I said, boys, this is what's going on. This is what has happened to me. This is why I reacted in this way. It's not okay. And I am sorry for that. You must know that your father was foolish and stupid in reacting and treating you that way when you were wrong. I should have been more patient. And that was a painful thing. And we had our moment together. But that's how I was able to move on from perpetuating that old inherited behavior. So I'm interested in knowing how you were able to move away from that.
There are multiple different ways of how I can go about this, but I'm going to actually work with what I established earlier in our conversation. And that was, I had my great grandparents who, time with them was just wonderful. It showed me what love, what care looked like, what nurturing looked like. And even though my family, my mom, my aunts did not like them because of, encouraging the divorce, I still found something very different from them. And so that kind of gave me that window of opportunity to go, life doesn't have to be like this. So that's one part. The second aspect was having friends and spending time at my friends' places. I was a latchkey kid, so it's like either I go home alone, my grandmother's out at Target or whatnot, working at, Kmart or whatnot, or, I spend time at friends' places. And so I spent a lot of times at friends' houses and noticed also a different dynamic. So the next factor is I vowed to remember what I experienced during childhood and how I felt about it. And I did not like it. I did not like what I was experiencing. So I took that to set the tone as the things that my mother is doing, the things that my grandma was doing were not model behaviors. So ultimately, I learned what not to do from them. And with learning what to do, once I became pregnant, I started going into research, started some deep dives into health, wellness, keeping my body as clean as possible because I want the healthiest kid as possible, and I obviously was going for a home water birth, which is what ended up happening because I don't trust the hospital system. It's a whole nother thing. I used to get sinus infections a lot as a kid. I'm highly sensitive to chemicals and all sorts of different things. So, doing another check. So with that research, also started on the research of, parenting. What type of parent did I want to be? Well, I wanted to actually have a, a parental bond with my child. And so that research came about. I got into a baby wearing community, happened to meet someone at the doctor's office, and the doctor that I chose does both homeopathic and then normal medical routes, but is well researched on both those factors. So that's why I specifically chose that doctor, because of the continued knowledge that she gained throughout her career and the research that she's done, which I find a lot of doctors, since they are so busy, overworked and overwhelmed, don't really have the time or take the time to do that. But yeah, that research paid off of choosing that doctor. And in the doctor's office, I met a woman who ran a mommy's group. So ended up getting in with that, which, once again, reinstilled the values of being more of a caring, nurturing parent instead of the traditional American parent that's all about shame, blame, punishments, and all that stuff. I'm not about that life. And that's not to say I don't have those moments of having my buttons pushed and, maybe yelling occasionally or those sorts of things. But I've only spanked my daughter once or twice just because I was at my limit. But it wasn't anything that was like super harsh. It wasn't anything that was super firm. It was just like, tap, I need you to stop type of thing. But along the way, I made sure to continue my learning and my personal development so that I could be there and show up for my daughter as best as possible. And part of that was also, I needed time for myself. So I was like, preschool, let's get her into a preschool. The first one did not work out at all. And she was just shutting down. The second one, however, is humanistic philosophy, Amalia, Summerhill type of preschooling and elementary school dynamic. So bringing my daughter to that, they had parenting classes, a whole lot of support, just a great space, beautiful experience. Like my daughter just blossomed there. She had her freedom to explore and experience who she is. I had my freedom to get back into the entertainment industry for a bit. And the school is run by child psychologists. So just something that I wish my daughter would have experienced throughout elementary school. But the divorce happened and her dad decided to pull her out of that. So needless to say, shit hit the fan with the divorce. And that was very, very, very challenging time. With everything that happened, like I was dealing with extreme anxiety. I had to hold space for my daughter for what she had experienced and gone through. Restraining order I had to file and all this crazy stuff that was just insane. And at the same time, barely scraping together money, living at a friend's place. It was just like it was very tough for me to handle and manage my emotions at that point. And that was probably the most challenging time of things, just because it was such a huge demand on me emotionally, physically, in every way, shape and form. And it was still, I didn't know how to really get the support that I needed and didn't have the people around me yet that that could provide a concrete or best outcome support system. So, it really comes down to multiple different factors of having awareness, remembering my thoughts and feelings during that, having cognitive empathy to go, if I didn't like this, why would I do it to someone else? And self-management, self-mastery, self-control to defy those things. And once again, I had a lot of alone time as a kid, so I got to really form and engage my thoughts. And I think that is definitely one of the things that helped me through it. Even though I didn't have a sense of personhood when I was growing up, I still had that alone time that still gave me a little bit of that autonomy, that little bit of a rebellious streak against what I was experiencing within the household. And then having a good support system is key for your idea of how you want to have that relationship. And so, I'm very thankful to be close to my daughter, and, I want her to be able to be open and transparent with me. So naturally, doing things like lying to her is not something that's going to work out. Like if I'm lying to her, she's going to have that idea that it's okay to lie to me. And, she's a teenager right now. So it's like, I want her to be able to open up and be transparent on things. Like if something bad happens, she knows that she can come to me, that I'm here for her and that she can count on me and rely on me. And sipiwie, it's exactly as you've stated. Like when I mess up, I make sure to apologize, to come clear about it, to have a discussion about that. Of like, yeah, I'm so sorry. That was not okay. And I want to check in with you on how your feelings are with that. So, I think that makes all the difference. And also understand that we're human, we mess up. And if you put too much on it, it's like, it actually inhibits connection instead of just coming clear on that. Like when you make a mistake, be like, hey, this was not cool. And I'm really sorry I did that. And it happens. We, do that as adults. And I know that Naval has also said something, along the lines of, you know, I'm completely paraphrasing, but I understand the sentiment of it is like kids are humans. They're miniature people and they get to be treated as people, not as kids or something separate until they are an adult. So if you're not going to do something to an adult, don't do it to a kid.
It's so beautiful that your daughter was saved from having to deal with that. I think our suffering should not be transferred to our children. And like, it warms my heart that your time alone, spending all the time alone, led you to think and plan much better so that you don't make your child suffer the same. I think that that's such a beautiful thing. I'm opening the room up now so that as we continue the conversation, other people can jump in freely and ask questions as well about aspects that they find interesting. So I just wanted to let you know so that it's now open. Now, it seems to me that most people tend to attract people into their lives that reflect some kind of dysfunction in their childhood. They seem to be attracted to those kinds of dramas, and it seems to be something that is subconscious. And it's not always. And just like you were able to, through silence and spending all the time alone and observing in your friends, with your great-grandparents, what normal is like, and you made sure that you maximize for that in your own family, I think that it is possible for people to escape that. It's not inevitable that if you grew up in a certain type of home, you are likely going to attract people into your lives that have that kind of dysfunction. But you mentioned that you ended up marrying someone that was narcissistic, as your mom was, or is. And it would be interesting to hear what you think about how you ended up in that situation, and whether you were able to see from a distance is what it is, or whether you were surprised to find out that that's what it was. With this, you can also discuss how some of that seeped into other parts of your life. So you were able to, for example, successfully stamp it out when it comes to how you raise your child, but were there other aspects of your life where you felt the pull and it led you to behave in ways that you now look back and think, I shouldn't have done that. That was not right. And that was the influence of growing up in that kind of environment. So I guess that's my question. It's two-layered, but you can go in whatever direction you like. I just think it's interesting to explore how we take the things that are not great in our lives and somehow perpetuate them, even though we don't like them. But for some reason, they come into our behavior and we have to like forcefully remove them.
Yes. So normally it's a parent that is the one who kind of keys someone into who they are going to have a relationship with in their future. I'll elaborate on that. So you grow up with this parent, they're your family, they are kind of the person that you either aspire to be or they influence your life in a variety of different ways, like, who you're going to have in a relationship. They kind of set the tone in a way, shape, or form. So you'll find people will, like, typically women who are heterosexual will typically go for someone that is like their dad if they have their father in their life. Or you'll see a guy that will go for someone that is like his mom. So this is kind of like a normal thing that happens just as part of our identity, which is familial. So this seems familiar, this seems like family, this seems comfortable, and it can have adverse reactions when a person is not aware of that. So yes, it is very subconscious to begin with. And eventually people can figure it out. Eventually people don't care to figure it out. Like maybe they're in a great relationship and yeah, the person kind of looks like their mom, kind of reminds them of their mom. It's kind of creepy in that way to be clear on that, but it's actually a very normal human proclivity. So when it comes to me in this paradigm, I still succumb to that because yes, the ex, it's not mine anymore, changing my language on that, but yes, the ex was actually worse than my mom. And in part, I was trying to escape my mom. Another aspect of that was I didn't have any self-love. Like I firmly believed, and I still war with this belief to this day, that there's something about me that is unlovable and that it is very hard for me to be with other people. And, there's different ways that I've tricked myself or lied to myself in pulling in evidence of that. And an aspect of that is the American culture very much reflects that. And I know a lot of people don't want to hear about this, but yeah, as a Black woman in America, it's not fun. There are a lot of things that, harkening back to schooling, when I hit middle school, I was like, something's not right here. Are they like prejudging me because of my brother? And it could either be that, or it could be facts of just growing up as a Black woman in America, or partially Black woman in America. So those beliefs and that struggle is something that I still deal with. Like, I recall loosely being hit on by someone who I find very attractive, and I didn't get it. I did not get it because, well, I was, at the beginning of my divorce and dealing with a lot of horrendous stuff. But in hindsight, reflecting on it, was like, did this guy, did he, like, I couldn't really come to terms with it. I couldn't believe it. And yeah, it kind of sucks that, I feel like I kind of missed out on an opportunity there, but who knows? But something that I've had to be mindful of is counteracting that old belief, that abandonment, which actually really was brought up at the point when I had my accident. Like, I had extreme PTSD while I was working for the goth club. And yeah. So needless to say, it's not just the alone time. The alone time helped me to basically self-coach myself to learn to overcome a lot on my own. So now, one of the things that I do, I coach how to teach people to do this, how to overcome it, how to counteract. And of course, I test these things on myself first. Then I test it on a free client, and then expand it to a variety of different people. And one of the things that I try to make sure of is that it is able to be taught in multiple different cultures. But then the downside of that is that I'm optimized to be alone. So coming back on things, how did I find myself in that situation with another person with narcissistic traits? In high school, I didn't date. Nobody would dare to ask me because I was very protective of myself. I walked around looking very angry and unhappy, which I was. I was very unhappy at that time. And, you see people being lovey-dovey and stuff, and I felt unlovable. So yeah, I was very unhappy about that. And really was just like, didn't want to see that stuff. And yeah, so needless to say, never dated in high school, never was approached. So I started dating around the age of 19, had no idea what I was doing, had no idea how to get into or create a relationship or what that was like, no experience or anything. So that first relationship lasted like 2 weeks. So a few years later, met a guy at a goth club. That relationship lasted for about a year and a half, and, found out that the guy was pining away over someone who really just wanted to manipulate him, string him along, and didn't really love him. A funny thing is a couple of years ago, he noticed that I was on a dating app and then hit me up on Facebook. It was like, I see you're on a dating app. And I was like, I'm not interested in anything other than platonic. And then he got offended, and we formally parted ways. So that is to say, a part of this is noticing the paradigm and really paying attention to things and not going back to old systems and situations. We teach a person on how we want to be treated. And back in the day, I taught this person that I could be a non-important person, that I would be the one doing all the work. And that is not okay with me. So I set the tone that, I'm only available for a platonic relationship moving forward. Because he mentioned bubble a couple of times. I tried ignoring it. And with that stated, I was like, yeah, he's trying to get with me again, and that's not going to work. So how did I get into the relationship with the ex? I was just kind of like at my wit's end and was like, I just want to have, a decent relationship. So at that point, that was when eHarmony was rather new. And I was like, okay, let's try out this eHarmony thing. And so tried it out, and, me being a dumbass at that time and not feeling lovable or, valued or wanted by anybody, I just was like, first guy that came along, great. And the first date was pretty incredible. Let's talk about love bombing. The first date could be summed up as a marathon date that literally started in the morning. I should have noticed red flags from the onset, like when he invited me out to a jazz festival in Long Beach and was like, oh, you need to pay for your ticket, without any forewarning on that. But, I just shrugged it off. I was like, oh, yeah, obviously I should have paid for my own ticket. I'm used to taking blame onto myself, and that's kind of set the tone for that relationship. That first date was like from 10 a.m. till 2 a.m. And I fell hook, line, and sinker for the love bombing. I was just so desperate to be loved, to, feel some sort of connection with someone, and didn't think anything else about it. And yeah, just went into the relationship. There was a bunch of red flags. I ignored them all and was just, yeah, that's pretty much the gist of it. So the divorce was a huge wake-up call. I mean, pretty much like I am no longer available for being treated like crap. And, it took a couple years post-divorce to get out there and start dating. Yes, I tried Tinder and was only interested in hookups, not really relationships. So did a couple of those and then, started getting a little bit interested in a serious relationship. And I am going to leave it as shit. And to be honest, I have been very disappointed with what's been out there. And yeah, there are definitely, I've noticed a variety of different things. So having my new expanded awareness, self-worth, self-love, there are things that I'll give grace on, but then I'll shut it down in a heartbeat. And it kind of takes people who are those with more narcissistic tendencies by surprise. Not the best thing, still finding balance in that. But my awareness has expanded to see how these types of people will test things. So there was one guy that kept on pushing off the date. And this happened 3 times where it was like, okay, we scheduled a day. And then it was like a couple hours before, it's like, oh yeah, I can't make it. And then, yeah, needs to say that happened 3 times. And then I was very clear with the guy that, hey, I'm not going to do this anymore. And it was a person in the industry as well. And I was like, yeah, I wouldn't even work with you. And I don't really kid love it. Like at that point, it's like, I don't need to filter my stuff. I'm going to give you feedback. And I don't really care at this point because you've wasted my time. So needless to say, he went all extremes and just blew up. Found out that he was just interested in me because I had met Sarah Silverman a couple of times doing Postmates. And that's pretty much who he was all about. So it just takes time. It takes awareness. It takes a lot to be able to spot the signs and symptoms and really overcome the hormonal cocktail of things to see a person as they are, to really let them expose themselves as to who they truly are, receive that, understand that, and then look at it from a point of view of, are we going to work in a relationship? Can I give that continuous grace unconditionally over these sorts of things? And that comes to considering values. So if there's a values misalignment, of course, that's not going to work. But if values are aligned and they stand by those values, meaning they practice what they preach, their behaviors are in line with their words, then, there's a chance that things will work out. But once again, it hasn't been an easy thing to find, and I haven't really had the time to just go on a bunch of dates. And unfortunately, the subconscious mechanisms of dating in general in this country kind of suck. So I tend to date international people. So through this process, I've kind of gotten an understanding as well of my kind of cultural predisposition, which is not really American, it's more Italian. And that really messes with a lot of Americans, which is funny. So yeah, I mean, that's been another discovery of just dating people that are not born in America is overall better for me and more of a better mesh with my personality type and identity. So overall, there's also one more thing that I wanted to say on this is I don't think people really know, aka it being subconscious, that they will go for someone that rehashes trauma or like a trauma bond. That is very much, I find that to be very much an American thing, especially with a lot of romance movies, romance novels kind of push people into trauma bonds being a good thing, and it's not. So it's really not till after the outfalling of a relationship does someone really become aware of that behavior and that paradigm. But a lot of people don't. And I remember one conversation on here where a person was like, yeah, women are just like this and they're just like very emotionally volatile. And I'm like, that's not normal. That is not normal. That is not women in general. There is something wrong there. And that is the type of person that they attract. So sometimes people will blame those who they are going after rather than looking internally in themselves and going, oh, I am the common denominator in all of these different relationships. So there is that necessity or that ability to have that introspective and to shift the blame from others onto yourself. And it's not really blaming yourself, but just having this awareness of going, that's interesting. Is this normal? Can things be different? And what does different get to look like? But really, it starts with that self-awareness. And that only happens through time. There are very few people who are highly self-aware at a young age. I feel like more of the newer generation that is being raised now are imbued with a little more of that self-awareness. And the coaching industry is relatively young, but I am noticing that a lot more people are open to that. And I highly recommend that as a coach myself. I really value supporting people so that they don't have to experience the same pain that I've had to experience, and they get to form better coping mechanisms. And it's more of collapsing that time frame that they have to learn these things, but really it still takes that training, because there is brain patterning that comes with that trauma bonding, all these different things that people need to pretty much reform a new habit, a new way of being, a new belief system. And it still, takes time. It's not just like snap your fingers and it's done. Although people can say that they've done that through hypnosis, there's still always a deeper layer to be addressed. And so, to this day, I still am dealing with these situations and still get to counterbalance those innate beliefs. So they don't really actually go away. You just have a better way of being and navigating in the world, and more awareness on top of that. So the other interesting aspect of me going through all of this learning, this ups and downs journey of trial and error, is that I've just gained more wisdom and insight around others too. So a lot of times if someone is dealing with a relationship issue and I'm coaching them, I can usually give them some insight into what the other person is dealing with or experiencing. And ultimately, I've actually saved a couple of relationships by doing that. So, yeah, that's a little bit about that. And I will pass back to you.
Thank you for sharing so generously. Really. There's so much to glean from what you've covered in the previous chits about the effects of not loving your children and giving them all the love that they need, and how it positions them in the world to be exploited by those who have a more predatory nature, because those are the people that tend to look for those signals that this person needs validation, they need someone that's going to just make them feel good, but because they're so desperate for that validation, they'll be willing to put up with much more than people who are emotionally healthy. On the issue of how you feel in America as a woman of color, as a black woman, or partially black woman, it would be very hard for me to relate to that from that perspective, because here in South Africa, women are loved. It doesn't matter what color you are. Men here just love you because you're a woman. And if you're a black woman, you will have no shortage whatsoever of people who want to love you, who are also good people. And I guess when you live in a country that's not predominantly black, you may struggle to find people who are favorable to that. But there's many other layers involved in that I would not actually be able to, unpack from an American perspective. What is common, though, is that even in South Africa, with all of this diversity, within the same race, you will find that people who feel unlovable emit certain signals subconsciously that tend to attract the kind of people who are predatorial. And those people know what a healthy person, an emotionally healthy person, sounds or behave. And they can pick up those subtle signals, and they know who to target. And they look for those people who are emotionally wounded. And I think there is nothing as important in life as loving your children. Like, let them feel loved. And I know that it has got such a huge, huge impact in how a person turns out in the future, and the amount of nonsense that they're going to be willing to put up with based on how they were treated at home or how they were not treated at home. And so that was really an insightful thing about the importance of loving your children.
Well, it's a quirky thing. So on one hand, I present Black, and then my cultural predisposition is very Italian. And America is very influenced by the entertainment industry, by media in general. So the entertainment industry focuses on stereotypes because that's what people associate with, and you typecast someone as this, and I don't fulfill any of that at all. And it freaks Americans out, to be honest. Like, they have a hard time handling that. So with other countries, it's not so heavily influenced in that way. And what I mean by that is there's a difference between hanging out with British actors and American actors. So British actors are very much like in their confidence. They know that they're a good actor. There's no question of it. They don't have to pose as anything better or bigger than what they are. They just are, and very comfortable with themselves. And American actors are a little more protective, a little more showy, not as down to earth, that sort of thing. But yeah, I'm very fortunate to be in Los Angeles, which is very diverse. So I've dated Indians. I have a Nigerian prince, yes, a legit prince that is wanting to start a relationship with me. And I'm kind of like, I don't think that's a good idea. Swedish. I've dated a South African who's a soccer player. Italian. So I've had no issues dating people from other countries. It's just when it comes to Americans and American mentality, not many people kind of break out of that stereotypical ideology, and that creates problems because I do not fit that mold whatsoever. And to put more of a point on it, it's like African American women are hyper sexualized. And I am actually pretty prude, oddly enough. People assume since I've worked at a goth club that, I'm very much into participating in BDSM, and I don't really care much for it. It's not like hugely my thing. And I have no judgments on those who do participate in it. And that also, freaks people out because I've been celibate for quite a few years. But once again, I do always question and reflect, like, is my experience something that is influenced by a belief, or is it something that is more external to me? So there's always that questioning, that counterbalancing, that looking at things in different ways, being open to different things and different perspectives.
You mentioned meditation. I think outside of prayer, which is something that I've always had in my life, and it has helped me and continues to help me through the craziest times of my life, the one other tool that I found to be so powerful has been meditation. And this is how it really has changed my life. One thing that it did was make me aware of how much emotion I was carrying around and not aware. Suddenly, I was aware that there was so much energy in my body that was moving me in many directions. And it felt like it was a subconscious movement, but it was a sensation in my body telling me to do something, to run away from something, to run towards something. And meditation has been an unveiling of myself to myself in a way that has dramatically changed how I show up in the world. It has been the greatest healer of my internal issues. And I'm wondering what meditation has done for you, and what difference you've seen, and what observations you've made as a result of being a meditator about yourself and the freedoms that it has brought to you.
With meditation, that is a whole that is a whole thing to unpack. My initial bouts of meditation was so I was a very shy kid, and because I felt, speaking in my household just didn't feel safe for the multiple reasons already expressed, such as, people in my household didn't really communicate, being abused for, coming to my mom with any sort of problem, like looking for nurturing. So talking was a very terrifying thing. So one of the earlier memories of meditating was I was just sitting there in one of the chairs in the living room, and I just kept on repeating this question in my mind, over and over and over again. And it just brought me to that space, which is, I would consider the void, which is, there is just nothingness. There is no you. It's indescribable in experience. And it's just like this space that is incredibly expanse, yet blissful, yet nothing attached. I can't really encompass a description of what it's like besides describing it as the void. But I was able to take consciousness into that space. And that itself is even tough to explain. But while I was in that sort of mantra meditating, my grandmother asked me if I said something, and I was like, no, I didn't say anything, but I've been repeating a question in my mind. I didn't say that I was repeating a question in my mind, but I was like, no. So there are interesting things that you can do with meditation. So I would do this countdown of matter. I mentioned in another room before, where I would start with like a molecule. What is that? That is in that. That's in a molecule. And what is that? That's in that. That's in this. And just take it down to an atom. And at that point, I didn't know what was smaller than an atom. And I would just let go into the unknown. And like no attachments on what the unknown is, no fear, just a complete letting go. And once again, that's how I would get to this space of the void. And I would just habitually do that, just experiment with that space, explore, and just enjoy that space. And once again, as a kid, I didn't realize I was meditating. I had heard, being raised in a Christian/Catholic family, my grandparents, great-grandparents, my grandmother and my great-grandparents, my mom's maternal great-grandparents that I lived near, they were Catholic, and then my mom decided to be Protestant and Presbyterian. So raised in a very Christian household, there was always this mention of like meditation, but it's vaguely tossed out there. It's like, meditate. And they're not teaching you how to meditate. It's just like this word that has no substance to it, no bearing, no meaning. And they just kind of flippantly put it out there. But it's within the scripture, and it's, it's something. But I never connected those two concepts with what I was doing and meditation together as a kid. It wasn't until much older that I was like, oh, I actually kind of stumbled upon this by happenstance. I don't even remember why or what happened the first time that I got myself into that space, but it eventually became habit. So another thing that I did was just experiment with my mind, and I guided myself into opening up my subconscious to a degree. I am very wary on teaching that or guiding people through that process, because if a person mishandles it, it can give them a flood of information and literally drive them insane. I believe there is a story of a performer, I think it's the violinist or something of that nature, a violinist or a pianist that was terrified to go on stage at this one point, and they kind of did a subconscious opening to kind of alleviate that, and the dude ended up going nuts. So I don't think people really conceptualize or understand the gravity of what can be done through meditation within our capacity of humanity. But it is very much necessary to us and to our being. I mean, even more so, I enjoy watching my cats just kind of like sit there in the sun and they just close their eyes. And a part of me, anthropomorphizing, believes that they are meditating as well. And this is just a space to be completely you without any of the external input of the world, which, you know, this kind of gets into questions of what is real, what is not. Is a wall just vibrating cells? And what can we do within this space that we kind of block ourselves from because of our teachings? So it's interesting reading books like Autobiography of a Yogi and, you know, hearing of these amazing feats that have very visceral sensations added to it, where I'm like, yeah, this might actually be credible. And this just begs to have so much more research in this area. Yet, you know, once again, there is this almost a religious, dogmatic fervor around science and dividing science from anything that can be considered metaphysical or spirituality. And that has created an issue in research that really could happen within the human potential. And I look forward to seeing, or, you know, should I be bequeathed with large sums of money, I would love to run a lot of experiments funded by myself in this area, just to kind of, you know, push the limits on that, on human connection, what makes us human in general.
Yeah. Yep. Nope. It's quite an interesting experience, and I've had lots of just random, weird, serendipitous, odd, fun experiences in my life, and you know, I'm kind of here for it. Kind of here.
You know, Brittany, as I have been talking to people, the one thing I've realized is how big people's lives are, and how many layers, like, compound to making up the person that we get to interact with. Your life is so immense. And I just want to thank you for giving me your time to answer the questions that I had. And there's so many directions that I could go. I mean, your life has got so many avenues that one can explore, like childhood development, learning, the education system, psychology, relationships, spirituality, and, you know, resilience. Someone that just has overcome over and over and over again the obstacles that have been placed in front of them. So I have a few questions for you. The first one is, how did you learn to love yourself? After going through a life where you felt like you were not lovable, like you were not worthy, how did you manage to re-identify with yourself and love yourself without turning bitter? The second question I have for you is about resilience and grit. You have gone through so many things in your life that have challenged you, and yet you still rise. You still go after it. You still get after it. How do you keep yourself going? How do you keep the fire alive, even though you have been challenged so hard in your life?
When it comes to love and exploring or discovering love, there's definitely bitterness around that. And when it comes to the statement of re-identify with myself, I actually had to identify myself, because I was raised in a household where I had no personhood. I wasn't recognized as a human being, basically, is what it felt like. And I undertook a journey, and I'm still kind of wrapping that material together of what I've learned of how vast an identity is, what exactly is an identity, and supporting people on pulling those aspects of themselves together to recognize themselves. And when it comes to meditation, then you can just ditch it all. But the beginning portions of that I've published so far are the 4 aspects of identity, which once again is on my blog, Obscuram.com, and I'll post a link below if anybody's curious about that. Coming back to love and self-love. First things first is identifying what is love and really exploring that force. In the American language, there is only one word to encompass such an extreme variety of expressions, of energetic forces, of different aspects or different facets of this thing that we call love. So on one hand, growing up in a Christian household, there is God is love. What does that mean? Instructions are vague. And looking at Christianity within the American paradigm, it's not loving at all. It doesn't express love. It doesn't encourage people to love. The instructions are vague. And so I feel a lot of people, and I noticed I myself, just kind of skirted over this thing, ignored it, was hostile to it, and just, well, hostile to aspects of it. But overall, I came to the realization around college time that I had no idea what love is, what it really means. And even with divorce pending, we were with a therapist, and that therapist turned to me and asked me, like in front of the ex, do you love him? Now, the messed up thing was that the ex was already having affairs at that point and probably had multiple affairs throughout the marriage. And I was like, I don't know. I couldn't really answer the question, and obviously not in front of him. The therapist had already chided me on some things like attributing proper meanings to words. And I said, there's a dictionary for a reason. And she got on my case about that. So I didn't feel like it was a safe space to really express what I was thinking or feeling. But what came out was, yeah, I guess, but I don't love the way that I'm being treated. Initially, the journey starting in college, Eric Fromm's book, The Art of Loving, was one of the books that I happened to come across. And I didn't really understand much of it at that time. It was kind of just like, okay, well, this is interesting, whatever type of thing. But I just reread that book this year, and much more came through for me with it. So to kind of bring more of a definite answer, love is a constant exploration. And there are different phases and stages of coming to terms with this force, this word, these vague instructions, vague understandings, hormonal cocktail that are all kind of encompassed under this single banner of love. And really, I mean, there's been different levels to it and understanding these different aspects as I go along. And that, started with the hormonal cocktail, which I think is a space that we all tend to start with, since love isn't a well discussed or really open topic in American culture. And the next progress is sorting out the after effects of that hormonal cocktail leaving a relationship. And what do things get to look like? How do you rekindle the love? How do you stay committed within that relationship? And then comes unconditional love with a child. And it's really tough to understand unconditionality without having a child. But even with a child, people still don't get it. And then loving myself really came clear and came concrete through the process of divorce. And even after that, I had to learn to connect with myself. I had to take alone time, cut off all external stimulus to really be in silence and stillness and to really see myself without any sort of influence. So that is like a total isolation dynamic that happened pre-pandemic. And then through all of my failures, all of the ups and downs, especially at the down points, to really still value and appreciate myself, to really understand what it takes to love myself, even when I am not at my best self. And then it comes to really continually considering, is this self-love or is it me trying to protect myself from things? So at aspects when I choose myself or I get to choose myself, it's always that question of, okay, what is really happening here? Am I actually choosing to love myself, or am I doing too much for someone, which is absolving myself and choosing them over me? So it's constantly this balancing act is the best way I can say it. But it was definitely a process and a lifetime progress. There is not a simple answer to that, but I will try to unpack it as much as possible. I mean, harkening back to just having so much time alone, it's part of the aspect of, me having to take care of things on my own, me having to figure things out. If I didn't have something, I would make it. And that is just a core ideology that has stuck with me because it's something that I was raised with. The second aspect of that is maintaining curiosity. And even though I had my moments of not being in a curious space, I still have that inclination that is just deep within of what else is there? What else is there to explore? And of course, life itself will answer in kind. So there's that old adage of you can sink or swim, but there's also treading water. And I choose to swim or tread water. And I've had my moments of just wanting to give up. That is a natural part of dealing with these situations. But once you overcome one thing, you can utilize that as a reminder of what you've overcome. And that'll propel you to overcome the next thing. So now that propels a person to overcome even bigger or different things, because now you know that you have the tool set to be able to achieve this. And that kind of gives a little more power to what a person can do. Having someone to fight for, like standing up for my daughter, protecting her, ensuring that she gets a decent childhood, is also another factor that I definitely feel has supported my resiliency. Being a little crazy helps too, like Lieutenant Dan screaming at the storm in, what was that movie? Forrest Gump. And not putting too much burden on struggles or beating oneself up over a time of struggle. One aspect of struggle is, as a parent, I've recognized this within myself, that I want to protect my daughter from struggles. And that is not a good thing. If someone does not know how to overcome struggles early on, it becomes very challenging for them to overcome struggles later on. So I don't pretend to be my daughter's savior, but I'll be her soundboard. And I will give her some guidance, but oftentimes she doesn't take it. So with that question, I recall going through a leadership program, and I did this over the pandemic. And at one point, there's this section that's just of first impressions. And it's not kind. It's not nice. It's just like, oh, you come across as this, you come across as this. And I was the only one that didn't really react much. And it would trip people out because they're like, well, you don't care. You're coming across as callous. Like, are you even taking this in? And prior to this program, a lot of people had assumed that I'd already gone through the program. My responses to their inquiries and their concerns about me not getting it were more of a jaded response of, yeah, I already know that. Tying in that little aside is I don't make a big deal out of the struggle. I don't make a big deal out of the situations. It's like, okay, if I need to cry, I will cry, I will process it, and then I move on. If I let it sink in too deep, if I let it take me over, it's going to be a lot harder to get through the situation. And what I mean by letting it sink in too deep, if I don't handle it or don't express immediately, if I just bottle it up and hold it in, it's going to be more challenging to really have that clarity, have that mindset of strategy to overcome the challenges in life. Through that experience of the leadership program, that really became clear to me because I don't put so much upon these things. It's like, okay, well, here's another shit hitting the fan moment. Let's get through it. Let's do this. Let's, hit it head on and not deliberate and not procrastinate, even though sometimes I do procrastinate, but I've learned the problems that cause or that arise from that procrastination. Overall, if there is a challenge, a struggle that you are dealing with that comes your way, face it head on. Don't wait. Don't deliberate. The time that takes just increases the problem, and it increases its power and hold over you because you're giving too much energy to it instead of seeing it for what it actually is and seeing the way through it. And to put a final note on that, resilience really does take a love for life, a curiosity to want to explore more, and a knowledge of yourself, of what you've overcome, and a knowledge that there's always more to experience in life. And a final note on that is remembering what you've asked from life. So one of the things that I recall is wanting to live life to the fullest. I don't advise that, but that is what I've gotten from life. And once I connected with the fact that, hey, I asked for this, I can't say I would change a thing.
The last one is not a question. It's more like a request. If you were to give advice to your 15-year-old self, knowing what you know now, and the things that you would have loved to accomplish, what would you say? What advice would you give to your 15-year-old self about how they should prepare themselves for life and how they should go at life?
At the age of 15 was around the time that I had broken my ankle. I was still high up in weight, probably about in between 260 and 230 at that time. I have 2 screws in my left ankle. That was the wake-up call to start losing weight. And I had undertaken that on my own by changing my diet because my mom fed us like junk food, Hamburger Helper, and stuff like that, which was what the problem ended up being part of that, and me having sodas, that sort of thing. So I had a lot going on in my life. There is no way that I would be able to receive any sort of advice at that point in time. or to really let it sink in. The better point in time for advice would have been after high school. And to be honest, it probably would have been, hey, have the hackers teach you coding and you're going to be doing this and don't balk at it. Just trust me on this. But once again, I don't know if I really would have received that because I was surrounded by hackers and I still didn't do it. So I'm a little stubborn in that regard. I'm going to come back to what my 15-year-old self really needed. And that wasn't advice. That was someone to acknowledge me, to acknowledge what I, at that point, was capable of, could have been capable of, giving me the insights of, hey, there's so much more that you can look at out there. Honoring my innate inclinations, honoring my curiosity, and I really needed someone to care about me, I think is more so what I needed at that point in time. And not just care about me, but see me. So that is different from advice. But that is also something that I've explored, and I know that people can explore, kind of going back and giving that love to oneself that was really needed, that would have been necessary during that time. And that helps to overcome things in the future. That helps to also create that self-love and craft a better mentality, a mindset that really could have been there all along. But you get to have it now. And that technique comes from NLP, or some people call it reparenting. I choose to call it reparenting because I'm not trained in NLP, but I'm aware of it. Yeah, when it comes to people's lives, there are decades of experience, literally. And I am not going to calculate the hours of that experience. The second subset of that is there is the external world of experiences, and then there's the internal world of experiences. So there is a compounding effect on the vastness of an individual, which keys me into the factor of identity and who a person truly is. We are far more than we give ourselves credit for. And I enjoy this exploration because it really opens up that understanding of vastness, because there's so much in our society that just wants people to be so cookie cutter. When it comes to interviews and diving into people sharing their experiences, it just opens up so much more about reality, about our reality, about who we are, what we can achieve, what we are capable of, and that there is so much more to each individual. So once again, a huge thank you to you on creating this experience and running this experiment, which for me has been a lot of fun. And I love it. I'm still toying with, ways of exploring air chat in this avenue as well.
Thank you so much for engaging with me. You were so open and you're so vulnerable. And when you interview people, it's very easy to find yourself projecting yourself into other people's stories. But I identified with so much of your life experience. And my prayer would be that God fulfills your desires, the desires of your heart, that even the bitterness from love, that spot may just be filled with true love that you will experience in your lifetime. EdChat is a really beautiful place, and I found that it is much more enjoyable when you come into it with an open heart. There's so many beautiful people here, and if you just engage with them with an open heart, you will have a very good time here. But I thank you. This has been awesome, and I'm sure I'm going to take some time to digest some of what we have spoken about. But it has been a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you do and what you get to contribute in this space.